And this is one of the 3 air bases that they have identified where they flew these ranch hand missions from. And they washed the planes down, they spilled big amounts in Bien Hoa, Phuket, they had a 30,000 gallon tank rupture one day and just all over the ground.
Bien Hoa also.
I'm sorry?
Bien Hoa.
Maybe it was Bien Hoa.
Bien Hoa was more than that, it's like 500,000 gallons.
Really? Huge number. Sorry, my statistics are not always completely accurate, but I got the right idea.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. No, hey, anything I say.
I searched Bien Hoa, and that's all that came up.
Yeah,
That's all that came up was the dump.
Yeah, the accident.
The leak.
But they also were doing spray missions out of there for years, and so they would wash the planes down, and then they were totally unconcerned about it, and so they would spill it on the ground in any number of ways. And the Da Nang airport is now being cleaned up, but I think Chuck's going to talk about that more. And then Susan's going to talk about the health effects of Agent Orange.
Thank you. I have problems sitting, so forgive me for getting up and walking in front of you. One of the things that we have spent a lot of time talking about and spending time with is the children who continue to be impacted from the spraying by the United States during the war years. And I wanted to start with a picture of a child from 1972 that was sent to me while I was doing work with an organization called Medical Aid for Indochina. The Vietnamese sent this picture and said, the United States has been using this chemical in Vietnam and it is impacting our children. So from 1972 onwards, there was some information and knowledge that there was going to be a harmful impact on the children. This is one example. Our next slide is of a young man in Tai Binh who has some autism. He basically looks at himself. He does not relate at all to the outside world. He has cerebral palsy, so he has no way of controlling his limbs. Part of the issue that we know will happen, as I'm looking around the room and seeing a lot of colleagues from that era, as we age out, as the parents in Vietnam age out, who will take care of the children? What will be the resources? These are children like this young man who is about 30 years old now. What happens to him? And it's part of the issue that we are trying to address in the legislation. This is the other picture. You can see that he kind of sits and just looks at his hand. And that is his world. That's it. His mother is fully responsible of taking care of him from day to day. There is no other stimulation. There is not a whole lot of other impact. And part of the problem exists because soldiers came from the north to the south and were impacted by the spraying. And then when they came back home, they carried with them the impact of having been contaminated with the Agent Orange, purple, blue, whatever you want to call it, and dioxin. And so when they had children, the children were impacted. The next slide is, I just have to describe to you kind of my impression. I've been in healthcare for many, many years. I have never seen the types of birth defects and deformities and disabilities that I saw the children in Vietnam. When I walked into this house, we walked into this house. We were on a Veterans for Peace tour. And I saw this young person and I thought, oh, he's a few months old. Our guide said he's 27 years old. Mm-hmm. And I thought, no, they had to mean 27 months, right? He's now about 32 years old. He is severely mentally challenged. He cannot move on his own. His mother, and you can see she is also getting older, has to carry him. They have limited resources. Electricity comes in a wire that comes through this one-room hut into their room. That's all that they have, and she has a small rice paddy out back. Another example of what the spraying has done. The story of this mother and child, it just also struck me because on the wall of the home is a picture of the mother with her husband when they first got married. And you can see their hope for the future. And then he went south and was a soldier in the war, and he came back home. He developed liver cancer and passed away, and she has a child who she is totally responsible to care for. I think one of the frustrations of seeing young people like this is that you know that somehow if there were some more resources, you could communicate with the child, you could provide a more enhancing environment. The mother struggles day by day to wash the child, to take care of her, and to make sure she's fed, and to take care of the home. And again, what happens when she's not around anymore? We, the United States government, not only destroyed the land and destroyed the animals and the mangrove forest, but we're talking about the future generation, because that's who we all look to, right? Our children and our children's children. For these people, what happens? There's not much of a family. The family who may have participated in the war effort, scattered, they don't exist. So that type of community that one would look to help care for children like this doesn't really exist. And this is in the north. And this young woman, you can see that she is terribly disfigured and her limbs are very static. She can't move. She has what was donated through an American organization, this seat that I cannot imagine would be very comfortable to sit in for very long. It's molded of plastic and she sits there. What I still find extraordinary is that the mother can understand what the child wants and what she needs. I just remember there was a group of us there and she started to make some noise. The mother took her inside and gave her water. She obviously understood what she needed. That was today, oh my goodness, 8 years ago?
Yeah, it was 2005, 2008.
Right. But one of the many thousands and thousands of children, she again is about 30 years old at this point. So we assume that her contamination and her birth defect was caused by the father who was in fact sprayed with the Agent Orange dioxin.
This is an Louis, so it's a contaminated area.
It was, yes.
I'm sorry.
Next. Right, this gentleman that had served in the NVA came back and had a young son. And if you can see closely the skin condition that he has, it's called chloracne. It certainly is one of those illnesses, diseases that we associate very closely with contamination by Agent Orange dioxin. And you can see it, I'm sorry,
Yeah, back
you can see it all over, right, his back. In addition, he's got these other terrible birth defects that cause his limbs to contracture, his body to move over. He's incontinent. The way that he comes to close it all is for someone to go into the home and literally pick him up and take him outside. Otherwise, he'll stay inside most of the day. And again, the question is resources and availability of people to come in and help relieve the family. These two young girls we saw several years ago, their sisters walking along hand in hand, and thought, oh, this is a beautiful scene. It's Aloe. It's as they come closer that you can see what's happened with one of the young girls. The next slide has the picture of the two of them together. She had excess fluid in her brain, hydrocephalus, and one of the ways of dealing with that was to put a shunt in to relieve the brain of all of that fluid. It may not have been timely enough because in the next slide you'll see the two of them standing together. This young girl is blind, is completely blind. And it occurred because she had this hydrocephalus. Yes, the condition was relieved by being able to drain the excess fluid, but the damage existed. If there were resources, and if we had some modern technology, she might have been okay. We show this slide of an orphanage outside of Ho Chi Minh City to show that, in fact, the birth defects in the children continues today. It's not something that happened 20, 30 years ago. Because the dioxin remains in some of the contaminated areas, as Paul was talking about, the old military bases that were sprayed heavily with the Agent Orange dioxin, the land remains contaminated. And children today continue to be born, and Anne was just there with these terrible birth defects. You can see that the children are terribly disfigured. They have, a lot of them have hydrocephalus, enlarged heads that have an impact on what they can see and how they can feel and how they relate to the world. Their limbs are atrophied. A lot of them also have spinal damage. And the next slide. We wanted to show you the slide of this young child who is kind of representative of a lot of the babies who are being born today. And part of the issue with the Agent Orange, and I'm sure you all have heard this before, but it was contaminated with one of the most harmful elements known to humans, and that's dioxin. It was produced by about 18, 20 different chemical companies, Dow and Monsanto included, who noticed at the time that there were some problems using the dioxin, that in fact it was contaminating this herbicide. And there is, I almost was going to say an email, there is a memo from one of the presidents of the company that says, we recognize that this contaminant exists. We cannot slow down production to deal with this. We cannot allow the information to get out because then there would be outrage from the American public. So they continued to produce the Agent Orange dioxin, and it continues today to have an impact on Vietnam, on the ecology, and on the children. We have one more slide of a couple of the babies. And we also wanted to let you know that our group, the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief Responsibility Campaign, is working with the Children of the Next Generation in the United States, an organization called COVA, Children of Vietnam Veterans Healthcare. Thank you. Health Alliance. Heather Bowser, who will be shown, oh, I'm sorry.
We didn't take, well, there's.
Yes, this is a child we visited at home. And can we go, right? Can we go back to the other picture? I'm sorry. What was stunning about seeing this child, despite all of her terrible deformities and the fact that she's bedbound, is a sister who has given up her life to take care of this child. And you can see that she just has not a whole lot of awareness of the rest of the world, certainly of strangers who are visiting. There was a group of us who visited 2 years ago. Two of us were nurses, and we thought, my goodness, you look at the child and look at her skin. She is in immaculate condition. She has been so well taken care of and loved by her family.
How old is she?
She is about 25 years old. Yeah. You can't tell because they have stunted growth that goes along with a lot of the other disabilities. But I think what is so magnificent is seeing families taking care of the children. They need relief, and they need help, and they need services. The next one, right, is Heather Bowser, who I mentioned before, who couldn't be with us today because she's in Vietnam actually with her son. Heather's father was in Vietnam for about a year. He passed away a number of years ago. He was about 50 years old. He had developed severe cardiac problems as a result of his exposure to the Agent Orange dioxin. We wanted to show you this picture because it was Heather visiting to do hospital. And if you look closely, you can see that Heather and the young Vietnamese child have almost the identical birth defects. So we use it to say to you, yes, we know that the Agent Orange, the dioxin, contaminated the parents, and we urge you to think about the children. The children both in this country and in Vietnam. The children, there are different types of services that are available for the children of American female veterans who served in Vietnam. There is only one recognized illness by the VA for the children of American male veterans, and it's spina bifida. There are so many similarities between the different types of birth defects that the children of both American male and female veterans have that we say, can't you notice that this is a result of their exposure to the Agent Orange dioxin? And one of our conclusions is the American government doesn't want to recognize that in fact these problems have been caused by the use of Agent Orange dioxin, and don't want to pay for it. I should mention that we did try to sue the chemical companies on behalf of Vietnamese nationals, and we lost the case, and we lost it on appeal, and the Supreme Court maybe positively didn't hear the case. So we went to the legislature, and Paul will talk about the legislation. There is one last slide of Heather's hand, and the young man's slide. Both
Chopped
miss.
off on the side.
So I just want to leave you with that, and we'll go on with the presentations to talk about the legislation, and Dan Shank, who is a Vietnam veteran, will present next.
So, it's always difficult for me to talk about this because I'm telling my story. I'm telling what happened to me, and I've told it a lot of times. Sometimes it's so difficult that all I can do is read it. Sometimes I can say it because it's automatic. I begin telling the story. But as a Vietnam veteran, you know, I'm going to read part of it, and I'm going to probably go back and forth a little bit. But I want to start off reading about it. I served in Vietnam in the Marine Corps, trained to kill with a 60 caliber machine gun. I was stationed in Phu Bai area, Quang Tri Phu Bai area in 1968, around August, October, September area time. I was only there about 3 months, but I was in one of the most heavily sprayed areas, and drinking the water, bathing in it, you know, even cutting bamboo and drinking water when we ran out of water. And then I remember even coming in, and we came in on a helicopter in this one area, and they had barrels and barrels of Agent Orange there. I remember even being stationed in a field where the field was burning, and a lot of the field was gone, but it was on fire. They dropped us into it as the field was burning, and we were breathing and walking right through that. Of course, you don't know any, you know, you're just glad to be alive walking through the jungle at any of this time, and we were many other things, but that's the story. There's other stories about what causes post-traumatic stress. But I came back from Vietnam, and the first thing I wanted to do was forget about the war. I got out of the military. I had enough of it, period. I took off my uniform in the airport, put it in the garbage can, and walked away. I didn't want to talk about it ever again. And then I thought, wow, I need a job. I got to do this. I got to go to school. And I fell in love, got married, and 2 years later, we had a child. My wife was pregnant. We have a child. We're just looking so forward to this. We were in, some of the first Lamaze classes and all this natural birth stuff that we wanted. We had a doctor. Who has a doctor named Miracle? It's our family doctor. And the family doctor, you know, he was beautiful. He working with us on all these new natural methods for natural birth and getting us a room. But he said, you know, we want to make sure we have everything there in case anything goes wrong. And of course, nothing's going to go wrong. We're going to have a perfect child. And you know, my wife was in about 10 hours of labor, and that was tough enough. We go in there, and all of a sudden, you know, a baby's born. They pull him out in case he's there. All of a sudden, there's a huddle around him, and I'm trying to figure out what's going wrong here, you know. And they said, they pull me out to the side. He says, sorry, I hate to tell you this, but I think we have some problems here. We gotta check him out a little bit further. There seems to be some anomalies here. And I mean, the first anomaly they would tell me about is that he had an extra large penis. I said, well, it couldn't be my child, but you know, I'm going, what's that mean? But they said if one anomaly's there, then there's probably more anomalies, you know. And they want to look a little closer, but he was sciatic. He had blue lips, and they knew that right away there was probably something with oxygenation in his heart. And then he had a seizure, and they had to put him in ICU. And they sent him up to Dornbecker Hospital up in Portland, a great children's hospital right next door to our medical hospital, training hospital, and the Veterans Hospital. Of course, I'm devastated. You know, my child is this beautiful child where you're going to count all the fingers and toes, and you're trying to think, what the hell is going on? I mean, my wife is, you know, trying to recover from just the labor. We're scared to death. We don't know what the fuck is going to happen in the rest of our lives here, and is our son going to survive? And I'm not thinking about Agent Orange. You know, I'm not thinking about any of that stuff. I'm just thinking about how can we take care of that child. And next thing, we're up at the hospital, and he's in an ICU unit, and he makes it through the seizure. They give him phenobarbital, and after a few weeks, they start telling us, you know, Arlene's not going to be able to breastfeed. He's got a cleft palate, so he can't take in the milk. He has a congenital heart disease. They call it tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary stenosis. It's a wonder I can still remember to say that. He had what they call prune belly. And just those little anomalies, little things that you don't think about, which makes it difficult for him for bowel movement and all kinds of different things for him growing up, and being able to sit up, his stomach and stuff. But Casey actually, you know, as we finally got him out of there, we had to go ourselves and learn how to take care of him. We had to know, you know, what to look for. If we had to bring him into the hospital right away, if he had another seizure, we had to administer phenobarbital to him. We had to, we got a lamb's nipple, somebody told us about, so it was long enough he could just basically drink his milk. And my wife would express her breast, and we still fed him breast milk, you know. Those were all the kinds of things that we were dealing with in the beginning. And then, you know, there was a family there that they put us in touch with. They started dealing with us. I'm trying to deal with this stuff, not even knowing if I have the strength to deal with this. And so they have psychologists that were working with us, my parents, introduced us to families that had children with cleft lip and palate. You know, had anomalies that were pretty horrendous, and they rebuilt faces. They showed you your children. I got to know those people. They're courageous people. Another family that had a child with a heart condition, and we got to know them real well, and our kids went to the doctors together. We were fortunate to have a system in Oregon that actually was called Crippled Children's, and if your child was born with a congenital disease, they put you immediately into this sort of tracking system that they paid all the medical expenses, and they'd follow your child until they were 21 years of age. And this was for their educational purposes. Those kinds of things don't even exist anymore in most cases. But so we had some kind of security of people surrounding us. And somewhere, and I don't know where it was, I started thinking, you know, about Vietnam. You know, my experience, it was more intuitive than anything else. And somewhere I had just read about Agent Orange. You know, when did the lawsuit take place, in 1980 or?
79, 84.
79. So I was just probably just barely hearing about it. This is, my son was 77, you know? And so it was just starting to get into the news. And somewhere I heard it and I thought, I mentioned, what about Agent Orange? You know, but they didn't know anything about it. They didn't want to talk about it. So I just let that go for a while and just kept worrying about my son. And a year later, I had a daughter. She was born in Harmony, Alexandra, and she was healthy and just vibrant and all the things that we had hoped for in the beginning with Casey. Casey was quiet, mainly because he's not afraid of barbital, you know. But we weaned him off of that. These two grew up as two wonderful little kids like any other kids. They would play and run and move around the house, and Casey, he couldn't go as fast as she. He'd walk after her, crawl after her, and he'd run out of breath, and he couldn't go as fast. She could just take off and get out of his way. And there were things that just made you laugh. Was Casey, because he was couldn't move that much, was more introspective. He thought about things in ways, and you could tell that because we had friends that played music, played guitar, and we'd be there. And wherever my wife would go, if somebody was playing music, he would drag her over to the musicians. And he loved the guitar, so we bought him a guitar, and he would work on to actually try and play that music. And I never seen a child, 2 years old trying to play guitar. So there was something. He didn't say much. He never said, "Daddy, Mommy," that's about it, and a glass of water. But I didn't ever think that he had mental problems. Just that he was thinking about things. He would think my daughter and him would get in a fight. She bit him once, and she ran off, and he couldn't catch up with her. So I mean, this was hours later. She's just standing up at the window of the back in the yard and looking out. He crawls over to her, puts his arm around her, and bites her back. And so we're seeing this great prognosis for his future is that he's probably going to go through some surgeries, and he had to go for surgery for his cleft palate. He made it through that. We constantly have doctor's appointments all the time. My wife was not working at the time. That was a full-time job, just taking care of him and my daughter. Just raising 2 kids would be enough. And then it came that my wife was saying Casey was having problems with his blood flow, and his legs were cramping up on him, and that we needed to get him into the doctors. And we went in there, and they said, no, he's going to have a shunt put in his heart. His blood isn't oxygenating very well. And so I had this terrible, terrible feeling that we shouldn't do this. And I have to say that there's an image in my head that goes right back to Vietnam. And it was, excuse me if I get emotional here. I remember the sergeant that picked me up in Vietnam when I first came there in Da Nang and drove us by Jeep to the company I was going to be with. And we were in the field, and we actually were doing a mutiny in the field, refusing to go any further. And the the commander ordered the sergeant to go down through the jungle. And I could see him go through the bushes. It was like the jungle opened up. He went behind this trail to go down there to follow those orders. The bushes came behind him, and you saw green, and he heard an explosion. He was killed. So I'm in the hospital, and I finally relented and said, okay, Casey's got to have this surgery. And Casey's on the gurney, and he's going into these 2 steel doors that opened up like the jungle to me. They opened the doors. He went in there. It was 10 hours later, and they told me my son was in a coma. Shit, I went nuts. I wanted to kill somebody. I went fucking nuts. And they brought doctors and psychiatrists and people to see me, because I just could not deal with this. And I was mad because I had that premonition and I didn't stop it. I don't know if it would have helped stopping it at that time, maybe in just another day, a different day for the surgery might have done something. I felt guilty. I felt guilty like when we were just for being in Vietnam. I felt guilty for all of that shit. So not just Agent Orange, but Agent Orange makes post-traumatic stress, you know? All of those things come together. They're all the same thing. And then, so Casey's now, after surgery, what they said is that, you know, they were gonna put in the shunt wasn't large enough. They're looking around for something out, too long, 10 hour, so many hours in surgery, oxygen shock to the brain, and now he's in a coma. They didn't sure he was gonna come out. 7 weeks in a coma, every day we were beside his bed. He had, something went wrong with his bowel movement, and they had to do surgery for him for that, while he was still in a coma. And then, towards the end, I just said, you know, we don't want any heroics here. Because you'd just be a vegetable if they just put him on stuff. So we eventually had the tubes removed, and my wife was holding him and holding Casey Allen Shea, and she says, "You need to hold him," and he was getting very cold. I put him in my arms, and he took his last breath, died in my arms. That's my story. But it's the story of hundreds and thousands of Vietnamese parents that are dealing with veterans here in the United States, veterans in Australia, veterans in Korea, veterans in New Zealand, veterans that served over there and were exposed to Agent Orange. There are the soldiers that fought with us, you know, the ARVNs and the refugees that left that country, boat people who are living in this country, who are silent about what happened in their family, because that's the great nation that took them in and they sided with us. So we don't even know the stories of those people. And one of the things that I want to do is to record those stories. And that's why I work so hard to make sure that male veterans are going to be, and their children are going to be taken care of. My daughter, when I'm now a grandfather, and my daughter worried about her child. Thank God, everything is going great there. But you don't know how many generations. You're talking third and fourth generation now in Vietnam. We don't know how this is going to play out. But we need to tell those stories so that people understand why it's important. It's important not just for Vietnam veterans and the parents and the kids, but it's also for those Iraq veterans and those people that go to war. Depleted uranium. We can't deal with our stuff. How are they going to deal with the stuff, burn pit exposures, depleted uranium? They're fighting for their health care right now. Is it going to be another 30, 40 years before they can get this resolved? So we need to still take care of it right now, here and now. And one of the things I wanted to do was to make it a bit more accessible to people. So I put up this little Facebook page in which people can just log in and post, become a friend. And we'll get the link up on our website, the national website, so that we just link into it. But you can always contact me through my email, which is djshay@hotmail.com, and I can send you a link. But it's an opportunity. If you are a Agent Orange victim, you can tell us, or you know somebody, or you know a child that has problems, friends that have died from Agent Orange, people that have cancer, and any of you that are here now, right now, if after this session, if you can come see me, I have my camera, I would like to just take your story. And then we can put it up on the website later. And then it's documented. Nobody can say, that they weren't contacted. We're going to make sure that that's up there for people to see. And that's my story. Thank you. Yeah.
Chuck's going to talk about changes.
Any questions?
Would you rather not take a question now, or
We have a couple more things to say, but
All right.
there'll be plenty of time for questions.
Stand up too, I think. Well, as we've heard, there's so many layers and so many dimensions to this tragic issue of Agent Orange. I'm going to focus a little more narrowly and also briefly, because I hope we'll have time for kind of a discussion. There are people in this room who actually know quite a lot more than I do. My friend and colleague Sewell Jones from Vietnam has spent a lot of time there. Trudy Bennett and many others here have long experience with Agent Orange in Vietnam and in the U.S. with American veterans. A question that has been looming in the minds of many of us who've been associated with Vietnam for a number of years has been under what circumstances will the U.S. take responsibility for what has been done to the Vietnamese and to American veterans. When I came to Vietnam in 1995 to start working on some rehabilitation programs, at that time Agent Orange was not even on the radar screen for anybody. The Vietnamese were too polite to bring it up in meetings with the U.S. The U.S. was in total denial. And when veterans and others who were Americans who were living in Vietnam began to raise the issue, we were basically shut down. The U.S. Embassy and others just said there's absolutely no scientific evidence, there's any connection whatsoever between Agent Orange and these disabilities, birth defects, illnesses, full stop. That's end of discussion. And it took a long time for the U.S. finally to acknowledge our responsibility to do something. It's been a very gradual, difficult path, but it began to happen over a period of many years, to the point where finally the U.S. agreed to, based on the research that had been done by Hatfield, which was shown a little bit earlier, to help deal with the contamination, starting with the Da Nang airport. So that is an $80 million project that's underway now at the Da Nang airport, and it was actually launched last April when Senator Leahy came in to take part in that ceremony to start what is a thermal desorption process. Actually, Paul ought to be presenting this because he's the engineer and I'm not, so I'm going to deal with this strictly in layman's terms. But to simplify it for everybody, this is the area of the Da Nang airport, which is one of the major hotspots of the 28 that have been listed in Vietnam. The first one to be mitigated by the U.S. on what was initially, I think, a $40 million contract, that's now doubled to $80 million, with American contractors who are basically cooking the soil. They're cleaning up 90-something cubic meters of soil and from a lake bed that's there on the northern end of the airport, and cooking it to 360 degrees centigrade, destroying basically everything that's in it, including the dioxin that remains. That process will go on for about, I think the current process will go on for maybe a year, and then they'll put another load in and repeat that process for another year. This is the huge structure that they built there. This is the beginning of the construction. That's when you were there, Paul, right?
No, I've not seen this.
Oh, you haven't seen that? Okay. This was the beginning of the construction. Now it's completed, and the walls around there are up to, semi-pyramid size. As you land on a plane at the Da Nang airport, you can see it. It looks like the start of one of the Egyptian pyramids being built there. But they're going to load all the dirt in there, and they had to build a huge new electrical generator, a huge new electrical substation to basically power this. And they'll cook this soil until it's destroyed, until everything in it is destroyed, including the dioxin. It's high tech, and there's some question about how effective it will be, but the USAID assumes that it's going to work, and it's going to work well. Whether they will go on after this to do Bien Hoa, the next major site, Bien Hoa Airport, and other large sites remains to be seen. There's a lot of confidence among some people that it will go on, and now it's irreversible, that we are committed and we will work with the Vietnamese to clean up these sites. The other sites are much smaller. Places like Ao Lily, where some of you in this room have been, and where our Veterans for Peace tour has been. Those are very small sites, affecting only a small number of families, but an area like the Bien Hoa Airport affects, I think there are around 16,000 families and residences right around that contaminated area. So it's a huge project, it's expensive and very difficult. I'm not going to really talk about this, but I want to just drop this into the mix. There are alternatives that may be considered. There's bioremediation, which is not really considered seriously by the U.S. government at this time. They may change their minds later, but that is an approach that's been tested in the laboratory, and it's also been tested in the field, using substrates, biological components, such as, for example, mushrooms. I know about that because we grow mushrooms in Quang Tri province as part of our project. But basically what's left after the mushrooms are harvested can be spread over contaminated areas, and the enzymes in there remain very active and very powerful when they go down and they destroy the dioxin. It's biologically safe, and it's ecologically friendly, and it's very inexpensive. It takes a while, and it may take a few billion tons of mushrooms, I'm not sure, but anyway, it's an approach that ought to be looked at. But finally, at least the U.S. is accepting some responsibility and is committed, I hope, through people like Senator Leahy, through their leadership, to continue this effort to clean up the hotspots. The other component of U.S. responsibility that has not really been faced up to until recently is dealing with the families. And we've seen plenty of evidence of that from Susan's presentation about the terrible conditions these families live in, and the huge challenges in their lives, the tremendous burdens that they have to bear almost alone. Over the years, Vietnamese institutions locally have helped as much as they can. The Red Cross, the Ministry, and the Department of Civil Labor, Ethics, and Social Affairs, VABA in more recent years.
What's VABA?
VABA.
What?
Sorry, the Vietnam Agent Orange Victims Association. And they have chapters in provinces and districts all over the country. They do quite a lot, and they disperse a large amount of funds. In the last year, in 2012, the Vietnamese government provided $100 million in direct funding to families affected by Agent Orange. Some of that through VABA, some through the Red Cross and other organizations. So the Vietnamese government has actually done much more than any international donors, including the U.S., to help the families. But the real challenge is dealing with the families in their homes, because you can't provide for estimated 3 million victims of Agent Orange in centers or hospitals or facilities that are far from their homes. So community-based rehabilitation is one of the approaches that the Vietnamese have used for a number of years. It's a model that has been promoted around the world by WHO. The Vietnamese learned quite a lot from Sweden that implemented that also and introduced it into Vietnam, and it's basically training local people, friends and neighbors in rehabilitation and interventions that can help families in their homes, simple exercises for the children, or proper positioning for feeding, or all sorts of medical and rehab approaches that make their lives better. It's inexpensive. It's local people being involved with their neighbors, and actually it works. So that's being looked at again today as an option for dealing with these families in their homes and helping them, because it's not going to be possible to take 3 million people into care centers and to keep them for how long? 6 weeks or 6 months, or and then what? Take them back home to the same conditions they were in before. It's better to try to make the conditions at home really work for the families. So medical, educational, social components of this are essential, and training, of course, is necessary for the caregivers. But the system actually works. We're pushing the U.S. to start supporting this approach. There's some successful projects that have been done in the Da Nang area, which they're not calling it CBR, they're calling it case management, but that's a fairly standard term that's used in social work and in other programs. But in any case, the idea is to identify the needs of the families, help develop a comprehensive plan to assist them, and to provide the services that they need. It's not expensive. I mean, it can be done very cheaply and it can be done very effectively. These are examples of the kinds of interventions that can be used to make families' lives better. As Susan pointed out, the parents are amazing in their care and in their love of these children, who are now some of them adults. And I was in a home two weeks ago in Quang Tri Province in Kamlo District, and the woman is a single mother with a daughter who's 20 years old, who is lying on the bed. She's immobilized. She's blind, and she can't speak, and she is as comfortable as she could possibly be with as much care as this woman could give her. And as one of the examples that Susan showed, the mother knows enough about this girl that she actually can communicate with her. Nobody else can. And she said, when I leave home, she said, I can leave her for as much as an hour because the neighbors are around. She said, I can leave home, and when I do, she said, I play classical music because she really likes that, and she knows which music she likes the best. So, you know, that's an example of the willingness of parents to do what they can. They just need help. They need some guidance and some support and sometimes professional intervention, sometimes just care that can be provided by neighbors. USAID has just announced a $21 million program to provide this kind of assistance to Vietnam over the next 5 years. They don't say this kind of assistance, they're saying programs for people with disabilities. And they don't call it Agent Orange, but they did mention in the material they circulated that especially for areas that may be impacted by Agent Orange. So the subtext is that we're not going to say this loudly, but we're trying to deal with Agent Orange for the first time. And they're asking for the first time for very innovative proposals. Come back to us with ideas about how to better serve these people. It's not a very rigid approach, which is refreshing. It's nice to see that they're doing it that way. Yesterday at the Board of Directors meeting, we talked a little bit about the possibility of Veterans for Peace joining in as an organizational sponsor partner with Project Renew, which is what I work with in Quang Tri Province, on developing a model program to show how CBR and home interventions can actually help these families. So there's been some progress. It's been a long haul, but now the U.S. is helping to clean up and finally willing to help to some extent, an unknown extent so far, but to help with families with disabilities.
So I'll wrap it up. I'll stand up too, just because it's y'all. So the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign, which is a committee of Veterans for Peace, is a project of national project of Veterans for Peace. As Susan mentioned, we started off supporting the Vietnamese lawsuit in 2005, I'm sorry, and that lawsuit went down in flames because the Supreme Court and other courts are so corrupted and self-centered. But since then, we've shifted our emphasis to legislation. And this is the second iteration. The Victims of Agent Orange Relief Act of 2013. There was also one in 2011. But it's been this is a new improved model, right? And it has these 5 elements. I just want to go through those really quickly. And one of the things we're asking people to do, and this is sign one of these cards. You can also keep one if you like, but we want the cards back that have been been signed. The idea with these cards is that when we have enough cards from your district, your congressional district, we will try to get people from Veterans for Peace or from National Lawyers Guild or whoever else would be interested to take these cards and hand them to your congressperson, so that they will understand that they have a number of constituents who support legislative action on the Agent Orange issue. And one thing I want to say is that there's been no legislative action yet on, I mean, there has been in terms of U.S. veterans, but there's never been any legislative action in terms of helping the Vietnamese. Senator Leahy, who's a marvelous man, but he's the head of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and he's slipped a few million in here and a few million in there as riders on big appropriations bills. And what this does is it legislates that the U.S. government has to take responsibility to help the Vietnamese. So there are these 5 elements with this. And just to go through those really quickly, and we've already covered pretty well some of them. Yeah, I just skipped one. Where did we go? Well, it's not organizational. Number 1 is to clean up the contamination in Vietnam. And as Chuck pointed out, we're cleaning up Da Nang. That's a huge step. That's a huge step. But it's not the 28 hotspots, or it's not the unknown hotspots. And we really need, and it's not clear whether they're going to take the next step and do Bien Hoa. Phuket, I think, is being taken care of by the Norwegians, somebody.
UNDP and
Well, there's a third country anyway that's doing Phuket.
I forget which
One of the, some,
Socialist
one of those sane governments around the world is helping with the third major hotspot. But the lesser hotspots, of which we know the most about, Alui, nobody's doing nothing. The Vietnamese put a fence around the hotspot, and have expelled about 24 families from that area. And we saw a couple of the victims from the Alui area. But that's all they've done is try to isolate it a little bit. But those spots need to be dealt with in a systematic way, and they're not going to be as expensive as the $80 million that's been spent on Da Nang Airport. The second item is assist the Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange, which I'm not going to cover that anymore. I think we understand what that means. The third item is provide assistance to the affected children and grandchildren of Vietnam veterans. I'll go into that a little bit of detail here. So, if those of you that are aware of the current situation, for male Vietnam veterans, the children of male Vietnam veterans, if they have a particular kind of spina bifida, that is, it's a neural tube defect. One expression is that as children are born and their spine is open, it's not fully closed. But that's just one piece of a range of neural tube defects, which includes the encephalitis that Susan talked about and so forth. However, since 2001, the Veterans Administration has 20 birth defects in the children of female Vietnam veterans, of which there's only about 6,000 military veterans who were female in the Vietnam War. And there's a whole list of those. Cleft palate, congenital heart disease, clubfoot, and on and on and on, including neural tube defects, right? That's a much broader thing than spina bifida. And one other thing is that even though that list has got 20 items, it says it's not a complete list. So if a woman, Vietnam veteran, has a child with a birth defect, they can at least approach the VA about getting that child health care through the VA system. What this bill does will extend that same list to the children of male veterans. It's only honest. It's only the right thing to do. And as we saw with Heather Bowser's, she's got missing a leg, missing some fingers, and it's the same kind of problem that if she was the daughter of a female Vietnam veteran, she would have been able to get care for that. And her organization has listed hundreds of children of male veterans, and female veterans too, but hundreds of veterans, children who have, and grandchildren who have various kinds of birth defects, and they're not getting any help from the U.S. And it's outrageous. And these are also the same birth defects that should be for which children who have those in Vietnam should be provided assistance. The fourth element is provide assistance to Vietnamese
Vietnamese Americans and former Armies would have the same thing, and it's only right that we help them too. The problem is that there's never been a public health study of the Vietnamese American community, ever. And so the first step would be to characterize that community, and then I'll probably put their head. And the last item, and this is one of my personal favorites, even though it's a small, relatively small. Every 2 years since 1994, the VA has hired the Institute of Medicine to provide do a study of the scientific evidence on Agent Orange exposures for the benefit of U.S. veterans. And every 2 years they do this biennial update. And every 2 years, one of the things that they've been told to do is to make recommendations concerning the need, if any, for additional research. And every 2 years they put a nice little pair, a few pages worth of recommendations in there, and every 2 years the VA ignores them. I think they've got it over the doorway at the VA headquarters. Don't look, don't find. So they have a number of recommendations. It says the VA should first of all look at its own data. The ranch hand data they have, which is just stuck in a closet someplace that they haven't looked at. They have the Agent Orange registry. Is anybody here?
Yeah,
Agent Orange
bullshit.
It's bullshit. I mean, actually, it's a very good physical.
It should be a good idea, but they don't coordinate it with the primary care doctors.
Right.
And you have to tell your doctor, hey, I've been in the Agent Orange study since 1980. And they forget. And the last time after I got my cancer, I went in and I went to the Agent Orange study because I hadn't been in 10 years or something because I figured it out. And I said, so they're getting ready to spray my community with Roundup on the power lines because they don't want to pay people to cut the foliage. And the woman said, and I said, so what's the difference between the Roundup and what we were poisoned with in Vietnam? And she said, well, in Vietnam they mixed some petroleum with it or something like that. And I said, who told you to say that? And she didn't know. And I said, well, where's your information from? And she didn't know, but it was just like,
Well, so
you're on your own.
So that's one problem with the Agent Orange registry is that you can go get a really good physical. It takes 4 hours to get a physical from these people. It's nice. They do a chest X-ray and all sorts of other. A guy will get a very detailed physical and a detailed write-up. That goes into a file in a file cabinet that's not connected to your medical records.
That's right.
But what the IOM is saying even more is that the VA doesn't look at that information. It's sitting there, and they have never mined that for data. They've never mined. It's not even in a single place.
Did they give you a copy of that?
You can ask for a copy, and you can use it.
Could you show it to your doctor?
Yeah, sure, you can get that, but you have to take that. You have to take that information.
Right.
You got about a 2-page summary or something like that.
Oh, is that right? I haven't asked for it, so I don't know. But you can get that. That's your information, but you have to carry it to give it to your doctor. And that's how that doesn't even help the individual veteran. But not only that, they don't have that. They've never aggregated that data, and so that somebody can study it and find out. Oh, we have all these guys that have gone through the registry who have this other kind of cancer that we've never looked at, and they've never looked at the children of those veterans. What percentage of those veterans have handicapped children? They don't know.
I just want to quickly mention, as everybody knows, the VA has an electronic medical record. That means that data is accessible. It would take someone who technically would be able to write a query to that database to be able to pull out the information. So it's not as though you have to go through and read all these medical records. It is sitting there. It would just really take a very good technical report writer to be able to, as Paul said, to mine that data and to pull it out. We would not be able to connect that with the children of veterans because we just don't have that data, we don't have that access. But the data for those folks who served in Vietnam, your medical records are all electronic. There is that database, so it can be done. It's that next step.
But they
Publicly accessible?
No.
No.
Oh, no, because that's private and confidential information, but it might take writing a grant
It's
to a
accessible to the
foundation.
vet.
Susan, are you saying, so if I had the agent registry interview,
Somebody sign on it.
that was electronic then?
That, the Agent Orange registry is not. Your medical record information is electronic. It's been electronic for about the last 10, 15 years. That is what, given the nature of the information, that it is private and confidential, not anybody could do that. It would take someone to be able to get permission from people's medical records and to be able to do that study. I'm just saying it's possible to do it. It's there. No.
Well,
like you would-
it's don't look, don't find.
collecting data. It's much easier, yes.
So I'm almost done, so let me move on to a couple more things. And then the second recommendation was to conduct studies, laboratory studies on epigenetic effects. That is, and there have been a few studies that show in rats that a female rat that is exposed, her third generation offspring can also show effects of all kinds of effects, whether it's not even just dioxin, it's also PCBs, exposure to other sides of insecticides. There are these epigenetic effects that work their way down through rats, and it's an area that should be studied widely, and it's not. There's only a few people doing it, and they're underfunded. So to study the epigenetic effects would solve that question of whether the male veteran's grandchild could have been affected by his exposure to Agent Orange, or female veteran's grandchild too. The third thing that they recommend is develop epidemiological protocols for studying the effects of Agent Orange on children and grandchildren of Vietnam War veterans. And their charge, the IOM charge, is for Vietnam veterans. It's not for everybody else. But even this would be a tremendous boon to the science. And it's a small, we're not talking about a lot of money, a few $1 million for each of these grants would solve many of these questions. And fourth is to conduct additional research on the toxicological effects of Agent Orange on aging veterans.
Does it impact any of us?
Wouldn't affect any of us.
Mental health.
And there's a fifth one, which is conduct further research on the Ranch Hand and Army Chemical cohorts. These are the guys that really were exposed every day because they were working with that stuff. And that's as a longitudinal study. They studied them back in the 1980s, I believe. Is that correct?
There's 20 years worth of data and specimens, including blood specimens. I'm sorry, this is something that we have been talking about. So there are biological specimens, there's data that's been collected. It has been held for the last several years by the Institute of Medicine, and what is needed is millions of dollars to be able to get a hold of that data and those specimens and do another study to identify what the impact is, how long the dioxin remained in the body, et cetera, and then also to correlate that information with the impact on the children or veterans. So it's there, it's very difficult to try to figure out who can do that study, who has the laboratory resources and the personnel. But again, it's there, it needs to be utilized.
So I think that brings us to the end. The organizers here at Asheville would like people to sign in to attending these workshops. So if you haven't signed this, would you please